In the dead of a frigid pinewood winter, I stood alone at the edge of a frozen lake, the ice cracking under the weight of my grief. My wife's coat, the last thing she'd worn before the accident that took her 7 years ago, slipped from my trembling hands into the water below, sinking into the dark. I'd come to let her go, but instead, I felt the world let go of me. That same night, miles away in a rotting barn, 2 7-year-old girls, twin sisters, shivered on a makeshift auction stage, their stepmother's cruel hands pushing them forward to be sold to the highest bidder. No one in the crowd stirred until I, hollowed by loss but driven by something I couldn't name, stepped into the dim light and changed their fates forever. Before we begin, if stories of quiet courage, unexpected love, and everyday miracles speak to your heart, consider subscribing. One click helps us bring more of these true-to-life inspirations into the world, and we're so grateful to have you with us. Now, let's begin. The old livestock barn still smelled faintly of manure, though no cow had been there in years. Dust hung in the slivers of sunlight cutting through the warped roof boards. Rusted cattle gates had been pushed aside to create a makeshift stage. And tonight, like every last Saturday of the month, it wasn't animals being sold. It was people. Children mostly. I stood near the back, my broad shoulders slouched slightly under a faded denim shirt, the collar upturned more out of habit than against any real wind. At my side, my 11-year-old son, Liam, gripped my hand with quiet trust. His pale eyes, filmed by blindness, scanned nothing. His hearing was dulled too. I had to speak slowly and clearly near his left ear for him to catch much. But tonight, Liam said nothing, and that was perhaps the heaviest weight on my heart. He shouldn't be here. Every bone in my body told me to leave, to take Liam and get out before the smell of desperation settled on me like it had on the others. But then they were dragged forward. 2 girls, 7 years old, maybe 8, identical in their bruises and bare feet, but not in spirit. One stood tall, defiant even in her trembling. The other clung to her sister's sleeve, her bottom lip quivering like a leaf in storm wind. The woman behind them, gaunt, sharp-eyed, and reeking of stale gin, jerked their arms as she shoved them into the spotlight. "This here's a 2-for-1, she sneered, waving a cigarette in the air. "Good girls, know how to wash, cook, stay out of the way." I raised them right, starting at 200. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Men shifted uncomfortably. A woman in a church coat clutched her handbag tighter. I felt something cold unfurl in my gut. The girls weren't flinching at the yelling. That was the worst part. They were used to it. I looked at Liam. My son tilted his head slightly, sensing the tension but seeing nothing. "No takers," the woman barked. "Fine. 150. They'll work. They know fear. And they don't cry no more. That's valuable." My jaw locked. I didn't plan this. I didn't come here with anything but a broken radiator to deliver and maybe sell for scrap. But something about the hollow look in the taller twin's eyes, something about how she curled her arm instinctively around her sister, made it impossible to walk away. $87, I heard myself say, and 5 cents. Every head turned. The woman on the stage squinted. "What? That's what I've got. You want them to go to someone who won't use them, someone who will feed them and let them sleep indoors. Then it's all I can offer." A silence blanketed the room, heavy and disbelieving. The stepmother scoffed. 87 for 2 mouths to feed. "I'm not buying mouths," I said. My voice was low but unwavering. "I'm giving a home." I stepped forward and reached into my worn leather wallet. The coins clinked louder than they should have. Then, from the shadows behind the crowd, a voice rang out. Smooth, female, unmistakably in control. "I'll cover the rest." All eyes turned. At the top of the old stairs stood a woman in a long coat, face partially hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Her gloved hand held a thin envelope, which she passed to the man running the auction. No one recognized her, and no one dared ask. The stepmother's eyes lit with greed. I looked toward the woman, but she was already walking away, boots clicking against the barn's wooden floor. She didn't look back. I turned to the twins. "Can you walk?" The one holding her sister nodded. I bent down. "I'm Ethan. This is Liam. You're safe now. Understand?" The girls didn't reply. but the way they stepped down from the platform, hands clasped tightly like lifelines, was answer enough. We rode home in my rust-streaked pickup under a sky that had begun to snow. I gave Liam the front seat and wrapped the twins in the only 2 spare jackets I owned, both of which smelled faintly of sawdust and diesel. Neither girl spoke, but the younger one eventually fell asleep against her sister's shoulder. The older one stared out the window like she was still trapped on the platform. "What are your names?" I asked gently. The older one hesitated. "Evelyn," she whispered. "She's Nora." "Pretty names," I said. "You girls hungry?" They didn't respond, but their silence was an answer in itself. When we arrived at my cabin, 2 rooms, a stove that hiccuped on cold mornings, and a fireplace that rarely had more than embers, I unlocked the door, switched on the overhead light, and let them step into their new world. The living room was small, worn, but clean. Liam's books were stacked carefully on the old coffee table, labeled in braille and marked with rubber bands. I watched as Evelyn scanned the space, eyes darting to every corner, assessing it like she might need to defend herself. "You can sleep here tonight," I said, gesturing to the pull-out couch. "Blankets are clean. I'll fix something warm." Evelyn didn't move. Her fingers brushed the edge of the couch like it might vanish. I crouched to her level. "You don't owe me anything," I said softly. "You're just home now. That's it." For the first time, something flickered in her expression. Not trust, but maybe the memory of what it felt like. In the kitchen, while boiling water for soup, I looked through the window. Snow fell in gentle sheets. I thought of the woman at the auction. The way she spoke, the way she disappeared. Who was she, and why me? But those were questions for another day. Tonight, 3 children were asleep under my roof, and the quiet hum of Liam breathing in the next room was the only answer I needed. Morning came to the cabin, slowly creeping in through the frost-laced windows, as though unsure if it was welcome. The old wood stove coughed twice before giving in to flame. And I stirred from the recliner I'd fallen asleep in, my back aching, the blanket over my chest half slid to the floor. I listened for a moment. Silence, but not the hollow kind. The kind filled with sleeping breath and something fragile, like hope. I rose quietly, stepped past the worn carpet, and peeked into the living room. Evelyn and Nora lay curled together on the pull-out couch, blanketed head to toe. Only the younger one's tiny hand peeked out, still gripping her sister's shirt even in sleep. Liam was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the braided rug, one hand on his talking storybook. It didn't make a sound, batteries long dead, but he turned the pages anyway, letting his fingers trace the raised lines. "Morning, buddy," I whispered, kneeling beside him. "Sleep okay?" Liam turned slightly, a slow nod. I placed a gentle hand on my son's shoulder. "We have guests now. Girls. Remember?" The boy nodded again, this time a little faster. "They'll be part of our family for a while," I said. "We help them, they help us. That okay with you?" Liam's hand found mine and held it for a moment. That was all the answer I needed. In the kitchen, I made oatmeal with a splash of canned milk and a spoonful of brown sugar I'd been saving for a holiday that never came. I set the table. 4 cracked bowls, 4 mismatched spoons, and 4 tin cups filled with lukewarm water. I paused, stared at the empty chair, then went back and added a 5th setting. When the girls awoke, Evelyn moved first, brushing hair from her sister's eyes and helping Nora sit up. She guided her like someone much older, someone who'd learned the world could turn violent at any moment and chose instead to shield someone smaller. I greeted them with a warm, "Morning," my voice careful, not too loud, not too soft. I offered them oatmeal. Nora eyed the bowl suspiciously. "We don't have to clean something for it." "No," I replied. Evelyn squinted at the spoons. "They match." I smiled faintly. Not even close. Liam sat already, waiting, fingers poised above his bowl, like he could feel the heat radiating from it. "Come on," I said, gesturing to the table. "Let's eat." The 5 of us sat down at the table. It was the first time I had used every seat since my wife passed away 7 years earlier. Back then, Liam was just a baby. The extra chairs had gone cold with time, pushed into corners, holding mail and dust and little else. Now there were elbows brushing, accidental nudges, awkward glances across oatmeal. It was quiet, Yes, but alive. Halfway through breakfast, Liam reached out tentatively and tapped the table twice, then 3 times. Evelyn noticed first. He's counting, she said softly. I looked up. You understood that? He tapped like we used to. In the dark, she said. 1 tap was yes. 2 was no. 3 meant I don't know. I blinked. You made that up? She nodded slowly. It was the only way to talk when she'd lock us in the closet. A silence fell like a snowdrift. I put my spoon down. Well, maybe we keep that code going. Could be useful. Liam smiled. It was faint, but it bloomed like dawn through mist. After breakfast, the children helped with small chores. Evelyn wiped down the counter. Nora swept without being asked. Liam, inspired by his new companions, asked by tapping to help bring in firewood. They worked like people used to, doing everything for survival. No fuss, no dragging feet, just quiet movement and the occasional sideways glance, like they were waiting for punishment that never came. I watched them from the doorway, my heart twisting. That afternoon, I pulled out an old box of blankets and found one with butterflies. I laid it at the end of the girls' makeshift bed. Hadn't seen this in years, I murmured. My wife's favorite. Evelyn stared at the blanket for a long while. Then, carefully, she folded it and placed it over Nora's shoulders before crawling under it herself. That night, I sat by the fire while Liam leaned against me, his head tucked into my arm. The girls lay nearby, whispering softly in their twin language. Half words, murmured sighs, rhythmic like breathing. Later, I stared at the ceiling long after the fire dimmed. 5 plates on a table. 3 children under one roof, and a nameless woman in a coat who disappeared as quickly as she came. I didn't know where this path was going. I didn't know if I could afford the next week, let alone the next year. But something in my soul, something buried deep under grief and grit, felt right. Not perfect, not easy, but good. And good in a world like this was something close to a miracle. The days that followed settled like new snow, soft but uncertain, beautiful yet precarious. Nothing in my cabin moved too fast, but everything was changing. I noticed it first in the quiet. It wasn't silence born of trauma anymore, the kind that clung to the girls like frostbite. It was different now, filled with hushed whispers between bunk beds, rustling pages from borrowed books, and the soft padding of bare feet in the morning as they helped one another get dressed in hand-me-downs too big for their frames. The sound of healing was always subtle. Liam had started sitting closer to the girls during meals, his head tilted slightly, as if listening through vibrations. I watched in awe the evening my son reached across the table and gently tapped Evelyn's bowl. 3 soft taps. I don't know, Evelyn said, smiling. That's what it means, right? Liam gave a quiet nod, then 1 tap. Yes. Nora giggled, a sound so rare I nearly dropped my fork. On the 4th morning, the sun slipped through the pine trees in golden strands, melting away a layer of snow that had blanketed the cabin overnight. I stepped onto the porch to chop firewood and found Evelyn already out there, sitting cross-legged on the top step, her breath visible in the cold air. You always up this early? I asked, grabbing my axe. She shrugged. Couldn't sleep. I paused. Bad dreams? She didn't answer, just looked out into the trees. After a beat, she turned to me. Why did you buy us? I lowered the axe. I didn't buy you, I said carefully. I offered everything I had to get you away from her. Evelyn's eyes flicked up. Why? You didn't know us. I sighed and leaned the axe against the railing. Liam was about your age when his mom passed. I know what it looks like when a kid's eyes stop hoping. She stared at me, searching for a crack in my voice, a lie in my eyes. She didn't find one. Later that day, Nora tripped on the rug near the stove and scraped her knee. It wasn't serious, but it bled, and she whimpered louder than anyone expected from a girl so usually tough. I knelt beside her, inspecting the wound with gentle fingers. All right, soldier, I said softly. Let's clean you up. But before I could rise, Evelyn appeared at my side with a damp cloth and an old first aid kit from the bathroom. Wait, she said. I've got it. She pressed the cloth to her sister's knee, then carefully dabbed away the blood. Her movements were slow, precise, far beyond her years. She blew gently to cool the sting before applying ointment and a bandage. She's better with wounds than anyone I know, Nora sniffled. I raised an eyebrow. How'd you learn all that? Evelyn didn't look up. I watched the nurses every time she hit us bad enough to go to the ER. Her voice was flat, matter of fact, but her hands didn't shake once. That night, after the kids were in bed, I stood at the window, watching the snowfall again. My thoughts wandered to the woman at the auction, the elegant stranger who vanished without a name. I still didn't know who she was, but someone had left a sealed envelope in our mailbox that morning with $100 cash and a note in neat cursive. Keep going. You're doing better than you think. I stared at the note for a long time. Who was she? Why me? A week later, I drove to the edge of town with Liam and the twins for our first outing together, an afternoon at the county library. I wasn't sure how we'd be received, especially with 3 children so visibly different from one another, but I hoped familiarity would soften suspicion. The librarian, a kind widow named Miss Eleanor, welcomed us with warm eyes. "You're the man who saved those girls," she whispered as she scanned our library cards. "God bless your heart." I didn't correct her. Inside the children's section, Nora discovered the audiobook shelf and rushed to show Liam, bouncing on her toes. Evelyn, meanwhile, wandered quietly through the non-fiction aisle until she came to a stop in front of the human anatomy section. She ran her fingers over a book's spine. "I want to know how it all works," she whispered. I knelt beside her. "Your body?" "No," she said. "How to fix people." I smiled. "Well, this is a good place to start." We left the library with 5 books, 3 smiling children, and something else I hadn't expected. A strange sense of forward motion, like the gears of a broken clock ticking back to life. That night, as I tucked Liam in, the boy tapped softly against the mattress. 1, pause, 1, pause, 1. Yes, yes, yes. I frowned. "What are you saying yes to, Bud?" Liam turned toward me, his pale eyes wide with something like clarity. "She helps," he whispered, voice barely audible. I froze. "You mean Nora?" Liam shook his head. "Evelyn." I blinked, overcome with something I couldn't name. Liam had never spoken so clearly, never used a name before. "How?" I asked gently. "She touches my hand," Liam said, tapping his palm lightly. "And I know what's real." That night, I sat by the fire again, knees aching, heart full. I looked around at the cabin, the drawings taped to the fridge, the muddy shoes by the door, the quiet breath of 3 sleeping children. I had nothing in the bank, no clear plan. But I had a boy who spoke, a girl who wanted to heal, and another who made us all laugh again. And somewhere out there, a stranger was watching, guiding, helping. I didn't know what tomorrow held. But tonight, for the first time in years, I didn't dread it. And that, I thought, pulling the blanket over my lap, was what hope sounded like. The first real storm of December arrived like an unwelcome visitor, one that didn't knock but slammed through the hills with ice-laced breath and howling gusts that bent the pine trees sideways. I had seen plenty of winters in the mountains of Colorado, but this one came early and mean. I was up on the roof before sunrise, nailing down a loose tin sheet that had started flapping like a broken wing in the wind. I should have replaced it last spring, but didn't pay for groceries or shoes. One nail at a time, that was how I held everything together. This roof, this life. Inside, the cabin was dim. The power had flickered off twice already, and the heat was unreliable on the best days. Still, the children bustled about with a quiet routine that no one had needed to teach them. Evelyn gathered firewood from the stack. Nora folded the clothes I had left hanging near the stove to dry. Liam sat cross-legged by the window, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks like an old song. They didn't complain, not once. At noon, the storm truly hit. The cabin groaned, the power cut out completely. I limped back inside, soaked and bleeding slightly from a nail I hadn't seen. I didn't realize the extent of it until Evelyn gasped. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," I muttered, brushing snow from my shoulders. "Roof's holding." But she was already at the sink, wetting a cloth, pulling down the first aid kit with the same methodical calm she had shown with Nora's scraped knee. "Sit," she ordered. I did, more surprised by the authority in her voice than the wound itself. She cleaned the cut, blew softly on the scrape, and wrapped it tighter than I probably would have myself. Then she looked up at me, not as a child to an adult, but as someone who understood pain intimately. You can't do it all by yourself. I exhaled, long and low. Someone has to. Evelyn tilted her head. Not if someone's helping. By mid-afternoon, the cabin was cold, the storm still raging, and I could feel the tension rising in the floorboards. Thin walls could only hold so much silence before it cracked into fear. So I lit every candle I could find, including the cinnamon-scented one my late wife had bought years ago that I'd never dared to use. I filled a pot with water, tossed in potatoes, lentils, and the last of the carrots, and stirred slowly over the fire. "Smells like soup," Nora said hopefully. "Almost," I replied. She leaned against my arm. "You're good at pretending things are fine." I gave her a sideways look. "That obvious?" She grinned. "Only to people who've done it too." We ate the soup on the floor near the hearth, bowls cradled in tired hands, spoons clicking softly. There was something sacred in that moment. 5 people huddled close, steam rising into the flickering candlelight, the outside world shut out entirely. Liam reached for seconds. I pretended not to cry. After dinner, Nora dug out a deck of cards and taught Liam how to sort them by touch. He couldn't see the numbers, but she let him guess by counting corners and reading patterns on the back. "Club feels like a paw," he said, running his fingers over the face. "And hearts are for girls," Nora teased. "Boys have hearts too," Liam replied, almost defensively. I turned toward the fireplace, hiding my smile. I didn't know where my son had learned to say something so profound, but I was glad. Evelyn sat nearby, still and quiet, flipping through one of the anatomy books from the library. She paused on a diagram of the human ear, touching the parts softly as if trying to map them back onto Liam. "You think I'll ever fix it?" she whispered, not realizing she'd spoken aloud. I looked over. "You're already fixing more than you know." The wind died after midnight. The power didn't come back. I found an old radio in the back closet and twisted the dial until it caught the faint hum of a weather report. Black ice, outages across 5 counties, school closures for the week. No one was coming up the road, not for a while. So we made the most of it. We built pillow forts. We made up stories. I taught them how to use a compass, how to read animal tracks in the snow, and how to cook oatmeal without burning it. And in return, the kids taught me how to smile without guilt, how to laugh without flinching, how to see my home not as a ruin, but a refuge. 3 days later, as the storm eased and the sun cracked through the trees, a surprise came with the morning mail. Wrapped in brown paper, left in the woodpile by someone unseen, was a brand new coat for Evelyn, a pair of fleece boots for Nora, and a braille watch for Liam. Each was tagged with a note in that same elegant cursive, "For those who walk through storms with open hearts." No signature, no return address. I held the note for a long time, my fingers brushing the paper like it might disappear if I blinked. Then I smiled, just slightly, and tucked it into the drawer where I kept the other miracles. The thaw came quietly. One morning in late January, the snow on the cabin's tin roof let go in a soft, wet rush, slipping off in great hunks and landing with a dull thud in the yard. A drip formed just outside the kitchen window, slow, steady, rhythmic. I watched it as I sipped my coffee, a worn flannel pulled tight across my shoulders. The scent of wood smoke clung to everything these days, but I didn't mind. It meant we were warm. It meant we had made it through another storm. Behind me, the twins sat cross-legged on the floor with Liam, who was tracing letters with his fingers across an old cereal box that Evelyn had flattened and written on in thick black marker. "D," Evelyn said. "Like doctor." Liam nodded, running his fingers across the curve. Nora piped in, "Or D like danger or donuts or dad." She shot me a cheeky grin. "Lots of things." I chuckled. "That's a wide spectrum." "Life is a wide spectrum," Nora said seriously, as if quoting scripture. I raised an eyebrow. "You're not wrong." Later that day, I drove into town to patch a leaking pipe at Miss Eleanor's bookshop, bringing Evelyn along for company, and because she'd taken to asking questions about everything. Valves, wrenches, pressure gauges. She wasn't just curious, She observed like someone gathering knowledge for a reason, like she needed it. "Why does the pipe hiss before it bursts?" she asked. "Because the air gets forced through before the water does," I explained. "It warns you if you listen close." Evelyn thought on that for a long moment. "So people hiss too?" I glanced sideways at her. "What do you mean?" "When they're about to break, they hiss first. They say sharp things, then they cry." I didn't know how to respond to that. She was 7, maybe 8 now, I wasn't sure. Either way, she saw too much. After the job, Miss Eleanor offered us cocoa and a plate of oatmeal cookies. While we sat in the cozy front nook of the shop, a sharp yelp came from outside, the high, panicked sound of an animal in trouble. Evelyn was on her feet before anyone else. We ran outside to find a golden retriever pup tangled in the neighbor's wire fence, a cut bleeding on its front leg. The neighbor stood nearby, looking panicked and unsure. "I'll call animal control," he muttered. Evelyn crouched beside the dog, whispering calmly. "No need. I can help," she said with a steadiness far beyond her years. I approached. "You sure?" She nodded without looking at me. "He's scared, but not dangerous." She tore a strip from the hem of her shirt, pressed it gently to the wound, then used a nearby twig and more fabric to create a makeshift splint. All the while, she hummed softly, a tune she said her real mom used to hum when they were babies. It wasn't a lullaby, it was steadier than that, reassuring. The pup stopped shaking. Miss Eleanor, standing behind me, whispered, "That child has healer's hands." I didn't reply, but I felt something settle in my chest, something like pride, but deeper, reverence. That evening, as we sat by the fire, Evelyn sat quietly, drawing in one of Liam's old notebooks. When she held it up, it was a rough but detailed sketch of the dog's leg, bones, muscle, wound site, all labeled as best she could manage with her limited spelling. I stared. "You remembered that much from the library books?" She nodded. "I want to fix people," she said plainly. Liam, curled next to her, reached for her drawing and gently tapped the page. One tap. "Yes. You're already fixing us," I murmured. The next morning, a package arrived. No delivery truck, no knock at the door, just a cardboard box wrapped in brown paper sitting on the porch like it had grown there. Inside, a brand new children's stethoscope, a blank white coat small enough for a child, and a book titled Healing Hands, The Beginner's Guide to Medical Curiosity. A note was tucked inside in that same elegant script. A gift for the girl who already knows what many adults forget, that healing begins with care, not credentials. I stood on the porch a long time, the note in my hand, the mountains quiet around me. Snow melt dripped from the eaves. Somewhere, someone was watching us, not from behind cameras or shadows, but with a heart that recognized something worth nurturing. I looked up at the sky and smiled softly. "Thank you," I whispered. When Evelyn opened the box and pulled out the coat, she didn't squeal or dance. She didn't cry. She simply slipped it on, buttoned it with small fingers, and looked down at herself like she had known all along that it would come. She stood taller. "Do I look like a doctor?" Liam raised one hand and gave a firm thumbs up. "You look like you were born for it," I said. She nodded solemnly. "Good. Then I'd better keep going." That night, Nora leaned against me on the old couch while Liam traced letters across her arm. "Do you think Evelyn will really be a doctor one day?" she asked. "I think she already is," I said. Nora smiled. "I want to be something too. Something big." "You already are." She shook her head. "No, I mean something loud. Something that talks back, something that makes the world pay attention." I thought of her voice in the mornings, the way she translated Liam's taps, the way she carried herself like a tiny firework in a glass jar. I nodded. "You'll find it." And in my heart, I already knew. One would heal with her hands, the other with her words. Both were miracles in motion. The snow was mostly gone by February, leaving behind a world half buried in mud and pine needles. In town, the sidewalks were wet and pocked with old salt stains, and the school building, small, square, and sagging slightly at the roofline, looked like it had held more winters than students. It was Nora's first day there. Evelyn had started attending classes 2 weeks earlier and had already become the quiet, curious child every teacher adored. But Nora was different. I had asked her 5 times that morning if she was nervous. She answered the same way each time, with a grin and a shrug. "I'm not nervous," she said, adjusting the blue hairband that held her curls out of her face. "I'm watching." "Watching?" I asked. "Yeah, to see who needs someone to say what they can't." I gave a soft laugh, shook my head. "You're 7, almost 8, she reminded me. I opened the truck door for her like she was stepping onto a stage. In many ways, she was. By noon, Nora had already made a mark, and not in the way I feared. It happened during lunch. A boy in her class, thin and skittish, dropped his tray near a group of older students. They laughed as he scrambled to pick it up, red-faced and muttering. "You're such a spaz," one boy sneered. "Bet your mom still feeds you with a baby spoon." The cafeteria fell into that uncomfortable hush when everyone hears the cruelty but no one knows what to do. No one except Nora. She stood up loudly. "That's not funny," she said, her voice clear and ringing off the tile. The group of older kids turned. The boy who dropped his tray froze. Nora took a step forward. "What's funny about someone being nervous or scared or needing help?" The ringleader scoffed. "Mind your business, orphan." Nora didn't flinch. "My business is people like him." Then, loud enough for the entire lunchroom to hear, "I used to hide under a bed because my mom's sister said I was too noisy to live in the house. But someone helped me. Someone who didn't have to. So I know what it feels like when nobody speaks up." Silence. Real silence. Then someone clapped. 1, 2, then more. The boy who dropped his tray blinked at her like she'd conjured fire. Nora just sat back down and resumed eating her peanut butter sandwich. Later that afternoon, I got the call from the principal's office. I braced for bad news. But instead, I was greeted by Mrs. Tate, the principal, who sounded more stunned than concerned. "Mr. Stone, I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "For what?" "For raising a 7-year-old civil rights leader." That evening, Nora recounted the entire story over dinner with the casual air of someone describing a game of tag. Evelyn blinked. "You stood up to a 5th grader." "He was a jerk," Nora said, shoveling mashed potatoes into her mouth. Liam smiled and tapped the table once. "Yes." I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on my youngest daughter. Not by blood, but by bond. She was growing into her fire. And that fire was starting to catch light in the people around her. The next week, an envelope arrived. No return address, no handwriting this time, only a small embossed card tucked inside. "The world needs more voices like hers. Consider this a beginning." Inside was a scholarship application form for a junior speech and debate summer camp held at a private university 4 hours away, expenses covered. I nearly dropped the form. "Someone's watching us again," I murmured. Nora didn't blink. "Good. I want them to see." As spring approached, the children bloomed in their own ways. Evelyn, now donning her white coat like a second skin, spent afternoons drawing diagrams of the human heart and reading aloud to Liam about the skeletal system, slowly turning the pages so he could touch and memorize. Nora wrote essays even when no one asked for them. Her latest, titled "Why Every Kid Deserves a Second Try," was posted on the school bulletin board. Parents began to notice. Liam, once silent, began asking questions, not with words, but taps and gestures and touches that made more sense than any spoken sentence ever could. His world was opening, piece by piece, with the help of sisters who refused to let him drift. I spent evenings watching them, not to supervise, but to marvel. And yet, despite everything we were building, I still felt the shadow of questions about Abigail, about what it meant to receive help from someone I couldn't name, about whether this miracle I was living was something I'd have to pay for one day. I kept the envelopes in the drawer with the others. I didn't know where it all led, but every time I looked at Nora, bold as thunder, or Evelyn, patient as rain, or Liam, blinking at the wind like he could feel the world again, I knew I wouldn't trade it for anything. That night, as the fire crackled low and the children slept soundly, I stepped outside with a blanket draped over my shoulders. The stars were out, the pines were quiet, and somewhere I knew a woman I hadn't seen since the auction still watched from afar. Not as a benefactor, not as a stranger, but as something far more mysterious and maybe far more personal than I'd ever dared to imagine. It began with a receipt. I found it wedged between the pages of Liam's favorite Braille storybook, likely slipped there by small, curious fingers. At first, I thought it was nothing, a slip of paper left over from one of the donation boxes that had appeared now and then on our porch. But this one had a printed name. Second Light Foundation, Disbursement Office, and beneath it, in small, refined cursive, A. Harper. I froze. Harper. I'd seen that name before, on the edge of a news article about a female billionaire who disappeared from the public eye years ago. A tech entrepreneur turned philanthropist, an orphan herself. And the name Second Light. I'd heard that whispered once in a town council meeting when someone mentioned a fund that quietly paid off overdue lunch debts for kids across 4 counties. I stared at the receipt for a long time. My hands felt cold. I hadn't gone looking for answers, but maybe it was time. The following morning, I loaded up the truck, leaving the kids with Miss Eleanor, who'd become something of an honorary aunt since that first cocoa and cookies encounter. I drove 3 hours north into the city, where glass buildings loomed like frozen waterfalls and traffic lights blinked above crowds that had no time to look at one another. I found the address listed on the receipt. A modest office in a quiet downtown block with no sign on the door, just a brass number and a buzzer. When I pressed it, a voice answered, "Second Light. I'm looking for Abigail Harper." A pause. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I think she might have saved my life. I'd just like 10 minutes. Another pause, longer this time. "Come in." The lobby was clean and quiet. Soft music played from somewhere unseen. Nothing dramatic, just a piano melody that settled gently into my bones. A woman in a charcoal suit greeted me. "Mr. Stone." I nodded. She opened a frosted glass door and gestured me through. Miss Harper doesn't meet with many people, but she asked to be notified if anyone ever came asking for her directly. My throat tightened. "Why?" "You'll have to ask her." Abigail Harper sat behind a desk of pale oak, surrounded by windows that looked out on the quiet edge of the city. She was older than the photo I remembered, late 40s, maybe 50, but her face held the same sharpness, the same poised stillness. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, just a simple sweater and slacks. Her hair was tied back, and in front of her sat a cup of untouched tea. When I entered, she stood slowly. "Mr. Stone." I hesitated. "You know me. I've known you since the auction." My jaw clenched slightly. "You paid for those girls." "I helped," she said gently. "You were the one who couldn't walk away." I stepped closer. "Why?" Abigail took a slow breath. "Because once, someone walked away from me. I was 8. Foster system. I thought someone would come. They didn't. So when I saw you, what you did, it was like watching a wound I never knew could heal begin to close." I said nothing, just stood there absorbing every word like a page I couldn't yet turn. Abigail gestured to the seat across from her. "Please, sit." We talked for almost an hour. Abigail explained that she'd created Second Light to help quietly, without publicity or praise. She sought out people who didn't ask for help but chose compassion anyway. I was one of them. "I didn't want to interfere," she said. "I just wanted to keep the light on so you could keep walking." My voice cracked. "You saved us more than once." "No," she said, her tone softer now. "You saved them. I just helped carry the lantern." Before I left, I stood in the doorway, hand resting on the frame. "I thought miracles were bigger," I said. Louder. Abigail smiled faintly. "The real ones are quiet. They let you believe you did it all yourself." Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, "Your daughter, Nora. She reminds me of who I might have become if someone had rescued me sooner." I blinked. "You remember her name?" "I remember everything." That evening, back at the cabin, the air felt different. I didn't tell the children everything, just that I'd met someone kind, someone who had helped us quietly and believed in what we were becoming. Nora pressed me. "Was she pretty?" I chuckled. "I guess that depends on what you mean by pretty." The invitation came in a thick ivory envelope, sealed with gold foil and addressed in ornate handwriting, "To the Stone family." I almost threw it out, assuming it was another charity flyer or bulk mail from a medical fundraiser. But inside was a formal letter from the Regional Children's Council, announcing that Nora Stone had been chosen to receive their annual Voice of Courage award. They were inviting her, her family, and her guardians to a small ceremony held at the county hall. Is this a mistake? I asked aloud, rereading the letter. Nora peeked over my shoulder. Nope. I'm awesome. I stared at her. What? She shrugged. You think I told that lunchroom story for free? The event was scheduled for the first Saturday in May. Spring had come to the mountains at last. Real spring. The kind with wildflowers curling up from damp soil and bees bumbling against sunlit window panes. Evelyn found an old sewing kit and mended the fraying hem of her favorite dress, determined not to let the loose threads ruin the occasion. Liam tried on 3 shirts before Evelyn helped him pick one with tiny white buttons and a collar he called the itchy kind. I, for my part, dug out the only jacket I owned that wasn't flannel and prayed it still fit. I hadn't worn it since Liam's baptism. It was tight across the shoulders now, but it would do. Abigail Harper, when she heard about the ceremony, offered to send a tailor. I refused. We have everything we need. The county hall was grand in the way old American buildings are. White pillars, wide steps, and the faint scent of lemon wax and old paper lingering in the walls. The auditorium seated 200, maybe more, and that night every seat was filled. 5 of us sat together in the front row. 5 seats, 1 family. Nora sat in the middle, fidgeting with the strap of her sandals, whispering jokes to Liam that made him snort with laughter. Evelyn sat tall and silent, her white coat folded neatly on her lap, even though she wasn't wearing it. I rested my hands on my knees, nerves prickling behind my collar. I was proud, deeply so, but also uneasy in the spotlight. I'd never liked recognition. I was more comfortable under a broken pipe than under bright lights. Then they called Nora's name. She walked to the podium with the confidence of someone 3 times her age. Her dress swayed gently with each step. Her curly hair had been tied back in a blue ribbon, the same one from her first day of school. The crowd clapped. The applause was warm, unforced, genuine. Nora took the microphone, cleared her throat, and looked out at the audience. Her voice was clear and certain. I used to think being loud made you bad, she began. I thought if I talked too much, people would stop listening. But then someone told me that voices aren't meant to be quiet. They're meant to be used, especially for people who are too scared to speak. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. She continued, My name is Nora Stone. I'm 7, almost 8, and I used to be very small in the world. But someone gave me a chair at the table, and now I want to make room for others. The room was still. Then someone stood and clapped. Others followed. Within seconds, the entire hall rose in a standing ovation. Nora beamed. I didn't clap. I couldn't. My hands had come together in front of my mouth, covering the softest sob I'd ever tried to hide. After the ceremony, parents, teachers, and even a local judge came over to shake hands and ask for photos. Someone offered Nora a tour of the local civic youth board. Someone else asked if Evelyn might want to visit the Children's Medical Center lab downtown. Liam stood close to me, leaning gently against my leg. I looked down and realized the boy was trembling, not from fear, but from overstimulation. I knelt and touched my son's arm gently. You okay? Liam tapped my knee. 1. Pause. 1. Yes. I smiled. You did good, bud. All of you. Then I saw her. Standing at the far end of the lobby near the tall double doors was Abigail Harper. No bodyguard, no assistant, no grand entrance, just her in a pale green coat with a silk scarf tied at the collar. She caught my eye and offered a small smile. I excused myself from the group and walked over slowly, still unsure what to call her. I wasn't sure you'd come, I said. I wasn't sure I should, she replied. You belong here, I said simply. Abigail's eyes softened. Thank you. I hesitated, then asked, why did you choose us? She looked past me toward the 3 children laughing beside the refreshment table. I didn't choose you, she said. I recognized you. There's a difference. Choosing implies power. Recognition implies fate. I let that sit between us for a moment. Then I said something I hadn't said in over a decade. Would you like to come by the house sometime? Abigail blinked. I would. That night, after the kids were tucked in and the jacket was hung back on its lonely nail by the front door, I sat with a cup of tea and a pencil in my hand. I opened my journal, the one I never showed anyone, and wrote, "There were 5 seats at the front of that hall tonight. One for a girl with fire, one for a girl with healing hands, one for a boy learning how to see without eyes, one for a man who didn't know he was strong, and one for the woman who kept the light on long enough for all of us to find our way." I closed the book. Outside, the porch light flickered once, then held steady. And somewhere inside me, so did the future. The first time Abigail Harper stayed for dinner, it was meatloaf night. Nothing special, no fancy linens, no candlelight, just a scratched-up wooden table, chipped plates, and the smell of Worcestershire sauce lingering in the air. But to me, it might as well have been a banquet. Abigail arrived with a basket of fresh bread, still warm, wrapped in a linen towel. "I wasn't sure what went with meatloaf," she said as I took her coat. "You brought bread," I said. "You could have brought gravel, and it still would have made the night better." She smiled, her eyes soft behind her reading glasses. The children had scrubbed everything twice. Nora even combed Liam's hair twice, though he hated the way it tickled his scalp. Evelyn wore her white coat like a uniform, serious and proud. I had worried it might feel forced, but it didn't. It felt good, uncomplicated, like warmth finding its way into cold rooms that had long forgotten what it felt like. We talked over dinner about small things. Liam's new interest in chess, Nora's plan to start a petition for a bigger library shelf, Evelyn's diagrams that were now taking up every inch of available wall space in the hallway. Abigail listened intently. She didn't interrupt. She didn't patronize. She asked follow-up questions like someone who truly wanted to know them. "You remember all this?" Nora marveled halfway through the meal. Abigail's voice was soft. "When you've spent most of your life being forgotten, remembering others becomes a kind of devotion." After dessert, peach cobbler from a can and instant whipped cream, I stepped out onto the porch while the kids argued over who got the last spoonful. I needed air, not because I was uncomfortable, but because something inside me was rising, like the tide, like memory, like the ache of something good finally within reach. Abigail joined me a moment later, folding her arms against the breeze. We stood in silence for a while, watching the moonlight stitch silver across the pines. "She's going to change things," I said, nodding toward the door. "Nora, maybe Evelyn too." Abigail smiled faintly. "They already are." I looked over at her. "You made that possible." "No," she said firmly. "You did." I leaned against the railing. "I don't always feel like the man they think I am." "They don't think anything," she replied. "They know. They live it." There was something about the way she said it, unapologetic, unpolished, that made me feel more seen than I'd felt in years. "Why us?" I asked again, even though we'd had that conversation. Abigail turned toward me. "Because your heart said yes when everyone else said no." The porch light flickered, as it sometimes did, then steadied. I chuckled. "That thing's held together with tape and prayer." Abigail glanced up. "Sometimes that's enough." Then, as naturally as the wind, she said, "Do you ever let someone take care of you?" I didn't answer at first. I wasn't sure I knew how. I said slowly, "I've been waiting so long to do the rescuing. I forgot I might need some too." Abigail reached out and touched my hand. Not dramatically, not in any way that demanded more, just long enough to say, "You're not alone anymore." And that was all I needed. Over the weeks that followed, Abigail visited more often. Not every day, not enough to disrupt the rhythm I had built, but enough to become part of it. She brought groceries sometimes, books, a tiny microscope for Evelyn, a pocket chessboard for Liam, a journal with an embossed cover for Nora that read, "Your voice matters." And more importantly, she stayed for dinner. She helped with dishes. She read aloud while the kids did their homework. She never tried to replace anyone. She simply showed up, consistently, gently, wholly. One afternoon in late May, Liam fell asleep with his head in Abigail's lap as she read from a book of fables. I walked in and froze in the doorway, watching her brush his hair back with a tenderness that nearly undid me. "You know," I said quietly, "he never used to fall asleep around people, not even me when he was little." Abigail looked up. "Then I won't move." I crossed the room, sat beside her on the floor, and exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I thought love like this came once," I admitted. "And if you lost it, that was it." It doesn't come once, she said. It comes when you're ready, and sometimes, only sometimes, you're lucky enough to recognize it. We sat there a long time. No declarations, no confessions, just the hum of peace finally allowed to exist without question. That night, Liam stirred in his sleep and murmured a word I hadn't heard from him before, Mama. Abigail, halfway out the door, turned. I whispered, he never said that before. She blinked, tears suddenly threatening. Then it wasn't me he meant. I smiled. Maybe not. Maybe it was something he felt tonight. Safety, presence, love. She stood there a moment longer, then left the porch light on behind her, just like always. The end of the school year brought with it a sudden flurry of firsts. Liam had his first classroom performance, standing at the front of his class with Evelyn beside him, reciting a poem they had memorized together. He couldn't see the faces in the crowd, but I could tell he felt the applause, warm and surrounding, like sunlight on skin. Nora received her first official invitation to join the junior speech team at the state level. Her essay, A Quiet Kid's Guide to Being Loud, had been published in the local newspaper, prompting an outpouring of letters from readers twice her age. Evelyn completed her first anatomy model, pieced together from cardboard, string, and patience, and her teacher whispered to me during pickup, "She's the most focused child I've ever met." But what caught me most off guard was the letter Evelyn handed me on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. "It's for you," she said simply, tucking it into the pocket of my flannel shirt before skipping off to make tea for Liam. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I unfolded the letter and read it beneath the flickering light of the old lamp in the corner. "Dear Dad, I call you that now because it's what you are. You didn't pick us from a catalogue or take us because it was easy. You stepped into a fire and never looked back. And I think that's what being a father really is. You didn't just give us a home. You gave us space to become people." Liam can hear the world now, not with his ears, but with his hands and heart. Nora shouts when it matters and listens when it counts. And me, I'm learning how to fix things. I think one day I'll fix people too. But only because you fixed something in me first. Thank you for choosing the hard thing, for staying, for teaching us how to stay too. Love, Evelyn. I folded the letter carefully, my hands trembling, not from age, but from wonder. I placed it in the wooden box beneath my bed, along with a collection of other sacred things. The receipt from the auction, Liam's first drawing, Nora's first petition, and a single note from Abigail that read, "You are the good that lasts." The next morning, I found Nora sitting on the porch steps, legs tucked beneath her, scribbling into a notebook. She didn't look up when I joined her. "Writing another speech?" I teased gently. "Not a speech," she said. "A letter. To who?" "To the kid who lives here next." I blinked. "Next?" She shrugged. "Someday, someone else might need this porch, these walls. I just want them to know they're already part of something good." I reached out and mussed her hair. "You're an old soul. I'm just a loud one," she grinned. That afternoon, Evelyn found me in the shed out back, organizing old tools and oil cans. "Can I ask you something?" she said, standing in the doorway in her white coat. "Always. If I go to medical school one day, and it takes me far away, would you be okay?" I set down the wrench I was holding. I walked over, crouched so we were eye level. "I want you to go as far as your feet and faith can carry you," I said. "And wherever you land, you'll still be mine." She blinked. "But we're not yours." I placed a hand gently over her heart. "You are in every way that matters." She wrapped her arms around me tightly, burying her face into my chest. I held her a long time. That evening, Abigail arrived unannounced, not with groceries or books or quiet charity, but with a single envelope. "This came today," she said, her voice carrying a weight it hadn't before. I opened it and scanned the contents slowly. A legal notice. Full parental guardianship awarded to me for Evelyn and Nora. It was done. No more temporary, no more paperwork, no more waiting. I looked up at Abigail, stunned. "You made this happen." "No," she said. "You did." But her eyes glistened. "Your family now," she added softly. I nodded, voice thick. "So are you." She hesitated. "I never thought I'd be included in something again." "You're not included," I said, taking her hand. "You're woven in. That night, for the first time, we lit the fireplace, not for warmth, but for celebration. Nora performed a dramatic reading of the guardianship letter. Liam clapped louder than anyone. Evelyn insisted on baking cookies with too much flour and not enough patience, resulting in a batch that was more crumb than cookie, but we all ate them anyway, laughing through the mess. Abigail stayed late, helping to sweep up the flour-dusted floor, her presence as steady as the firelight. The weeks that followed were a gentle unfolding. Abigail became a fixture, not a guest, but family. She taught Nora how to braid her hair in new patterns, showed Liam how to feel the rhythm of music through a wooden spoon held against a table, and sat with Evelyn to discuss the ethics of medicine, treating the girls' questions with the gravity of a colleague. One evening, as summer crept closer, I found Abigail on the porch, staring at the horizon where the pines met the sky. "You're quiet tonight," I said, joining her. She smiled faintly. "Just thinking about how much can change when someone says yes." I nodded, leaning against the railing. "I said yes that night because I couldn't say no. But you said yes to us long after the auction." Abigail turned to me. "I saw something in you, Ethan. Not just a man saving two girls, but a man who could rebuild a world for them." I looked at her, the weight of her words settling deep. "And you rebuilt mine." We stood there, the space between us no longer cautious but comfortable, like a path walked many times. "Stay tonight," I said softly. "Not just for dinner. Stay." Abigail's eyes held mine for a long moment. "I will." That night, the cabin felt fuller, not just with people, but with possibility. The children sensed it too. Liam fell asleep with a smile, his fingers curled around the Braille watch. Nora whispered to Evelyn about writing a book someday, one that would tell our story. Evelyn, ever practical, murmured, "Only if it has a chapter on how to stitch a wound." The end of spring brought a new rhythm. Liam began speaking more, small sentences at first, each one a victory. Nora's essays were read aloud at a community event, earning her a standing ovation and an offer to speak at a youth conference. Evelyn was invited to shadow a doctor at the county hospital, her white coat no longer a symbol but a promise. Abigail and I grew closer, our bond unspoken but undeniable. We shared quiet mornings, late-night talks, and the occasional stolen glance that said more than words could. The children called her Abby now, a name that felt like home. One warm June evening, we gathered outside to watch the stars. Liam lay on a blanket, tracing constellations with his fingers as Evelyn described them. Nora, ever the storyteller, spun a tale about a family forged in a storm, our love stronger than any gale. I sat close to Abigail, her hand resting in mine. "Do you think," Nora asked, pausing her story, "that we were always meant to find each other?" I looked at my children, then at Abigail, and felt the ache of the lake from that winter night ease at last. "I think," I said, "some things are too good to be chance." Abigail squeezed my hand. "Fate doesn't choose us. We choose it back." The fireflies began to blink, tiny miracles in the dusk. Liam tapped the blanket once. "Yes." Evelyn smiled, her stethoscope glinting in the starlight. Nora laughed, her voice carrying into the night. I pulled my family close, the weight of my wife's coat no longer a chain but a memory woven into something new. This was my everyday miracle, not a moment, but a life built from broken pieces, held together by love that refused to let go. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. If this story touched you, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let us feel a little closer across the miles. Every story finds its home in the hearts of those who need it. And sometimes, that's all it takes.